After a month of holding back, finally I got the chance to attend an auction of ancient artifacts to add something to my antique collection. Surprisingly, it was the first time I was visiting this place for auction, and never even heard of it before. When I reached there, various things caught my attention and I bought them for my collection. But this voodoo doll was something that I saw there, and instantly it became the dearest of all those things there. I knew I would get it. So I decided at that very moment that I wouldn't be leaving without it. There were a few ancient accessories along with that voodoo stuff, used by Native Americans in the collection with this voodoo doll, so I bought them too. When the auctioneer finalized my bid for the voodoo doll, I was startled to see that none of the others were bidding on that doll. I thought of it to be strange that none of them were interested in it, as if they knew something that I didn't know. I could sense those weird people staring at me when I increased the bid out of curiosity and interest. I even overheard someone calling me an occultist, because according to them the voodoo doll was cursed and it has so-called demonic powers in it. But for me, it was just something that my collection lacked, and I wanted to add it to my collection. I didn't pay a single ounce of attention to any of those rumors, and bought that voodoo stuff along with the doll. I was really happy to put that stuff in the room where I keep the antiquities of my collection. I even made a special place for the doll there. It was late at night and I was so tired when I got home, so I slept immediately. That night was the longest night that I ever experienced in my life. My life took a tragic turn that night. I didn't know what I brought home along with that doll, and what is it going to do with me? So, that night, I was in my room, sleeping, when I heard someone whispering in an ancient language that I could not understand, but it was disturbing me a lot. I thought some neighbors might be praying, but that wasn't the case, unfortunately. I ignored it for some time and took the blanket on my head. Suddenly, something swept across my feet which felt like crooked fingers. That shook me up, but I thought it might be the blanket. Then I felt the same bony fingers on my neck, followed by someone breathing heavily, very close to me. I took the blanket off immediately, as I thought that a thief had entered my house. I took my baseball bat and checked all around my house, but couldn't find anyone. I came back in again, went to bed to sleep. I took the blanket and this time I did not hear any whisper. But right at the moment when I was about to sleep, something tapped right above my forehead, with its cold crooked finger left me flabbergasted, and I stood up to see who was there. And yet again, there was no one. I couldn't see anyone in the room, except me. Suddenly, I started hearing the sound of someone whispering in that ancient language again. This time whispers were intensified. I thought of ending this situation, so I tried to follow the voice. I was shocked to realize that the sound was coming from my collection room. An idea swept across my mind that maybe the thief might have entered the room and was trying to steal my collectibles. I had a baseball bat with me for that retaliate, in case there was someone in the room. I advanced towards the room and opened the door steadily. When I got the first sight of that room, the land slid below my feet and I dropped the bat unconsciously. Everything in the room was almost upside down. Every artifact was either smashed against the walls, or it was flying mysteriously off the shelf and on the ground. Only one thing was intact in its place, and it was that voodoo doll. But strangely, the doll was misplaced as well. I perfectly remembered that I kept it in the glass cabinet. But surprisingly, the doll was sitting right there on the table, and the door of the cabinet was open. A streak of these strange occurrences didn't stop there. In that room, I saw a crookedly tall man with his neck bent in a twisted way, his hair covering his face, and red shiny eyes partially visible behind his hair. He was standing right beside the doll. He was gasping and standing in the corner of the room. He was moving wickedly in a strange manner, and just around the doll. He wasn't bothered that I was standing there looking at him. Instead, he raised the voice of the incantations that he was chanting around that voodoo doll. Then again, he started whispering in a violently wicked and devilish voice. I couldn't understand anything he whispered or said, but I speculated that this was something like occult or black magic that he was doing. When I caught the sight of this scene, I got terrified. I shouted in a trembling voice, "Who is this? I am asking for the last time. I am calling the police. I am gonna hit you now." But it did not respond to anything, and kept on whispering in his violent tone. He was moving his head aggressively and continuously throughout this time. Gathering all the courage I had left, I fearfully approached that man and raised my hand towards him. He swiftly turned towards me, and once again, he left me petrified. Undoubtedly, it wasn't a human. His eyes were filled with evil, and the face was bent with its twisted neck. He was wearing a long black dress. It was the last thing I saw before I screamed and fell unconscious on the floor. The second thing that I got to know was waking up in a hospital with strange marks on my body. Doctors told me that my neighbor brought me to the hospital along with the police. Then I got to know that my neighbor heard my screams and called the police. When the police came, they heard my scream smashing sound from my house as well, and broke the door to my house as I wasn't opening. Police found me unconscious on the floor, and everything in my house was torn apart as if a storm just passed by. Then I opened my eyes in the hospital and couldn't understand what happened to me. I noticed that police and doctors were hesitant to tell me something, but after insisting, they told me that during that chaos, the room of my collectibles caught fire mysteriously and only a few things were retrieved from the room fortunately. The fire was stopped before spreading in the house. The other policeman brought a box into the room, and he said that only these things were saved from the fire that night. And he handed me that box. When everyone left the room, I got up and opened the box and saw the same voodoo doll on the top of that stuff. I stepped back, fell on the ground, and started screaming. Doctors came in and gave me an injection to calm me down. It took me a week to get out of that trauma. As I was back to normal, I took that doll and went straight to the auction site to return the voodoo doll. I heard strange news there which shook me. They told me that the site was burned because of some mysterious fire which killed the auctioneer too, along with many other people. Somehow I found one old native villager passing by who saw that doll in my hands and started staring at me. I told him everything that happened to me. He didn't even say a word and started advancing towards me. He came near my face, looked right into my eyes, and whispered, "This thing was not meant to be with humans. You are lucky that you are alive." Then he took that voodoo doll from my hands and walked away. Since then I haven't experienced any of these encounters again, but I can never forget the demon I took along with this doll to my home. I could only say one thing about that night. It was a demon, worshipping the voodoo or the doll that belonged to him.